and you are unmuted.
Awesome. Hey, good evening, everybody. My name is Ruben. I'm an alcoholic,
Hey,
and
Ru.
hi, and really grateful to be here tonight and being able to share at this meeting. I've known about this meeting for a while, and this meeting was certainly ahead of the game before the pandemic kicked off. And it was, and I've run into a few that have been going since before the pandemic. Just a couple of things. I've got a home group. It's a Wandering Men's meeting. We still meet on Friday nights. I've got a sobriety date. It's March 27th of 2000. And so I'm grateful that I just recently celebrated 20 years of recovery, and super grateful for that. And I'm going to share my experience, strength, and hope. And I heard somebody talking before the meeting got started, and I can totally relate to what that person's going to in my own way. So for starters, I got drunk for the first time when I was 14 years old, and I didn't get sober until I was 28. For those 14 years, though, my only real reason for drinking was to get drunk. It wasn't towards the end of the last few years of my drinking that I ever tried any of the controlled drinking that I learned about here in Alcoholics Anonymous. But by and large, the only thing that ever really managed my drinking was if I got drunk well enough to pass out, or if I ran out of money. And I have no idea what it's like to be a social drinker. I have no idea what it's like to just have one or two. When I got drunk for the first time at 14, I desperately needed that drink. I was born with those three things they talk about: a restless, irritable, and discontent. And I believe that my higher power introduced alcohol into my life to save it. At the age of 14, I was ready to kill myself. I had nothing going on in my life that warranted that type of feeling or behavior. I had a pretty strict dad, and I had an overbearing mom. I had a younger sister. We lived indoors. We had electricity. We had heat. We had food. And I didn't need anything. I had everything I needed, and not necessarily everything I wanted, but we were okay. And none of that was ever good enough. There was absolutely nothing going on in my life that warranted the idea of wanting to kill myself. And I had felt that way for a number of years. And when I got drunk, that all went away. And I learned in recovery that if you feel that crappy about yourself, and drinking makes it all go away, like, why wouldn't I drink? I found my solution. I had my first spiritual awakening, and that's all I ever wanted. And for 14 years, that's what I did. I grew up here in Chicago, in the Humboldt Park neighborhood, in the mid 80s to the 90, early until 90 when I left. I didn't have a problem being able to find alcohol. I could rattle off 5 or 6 liquor stores that are still open today, and they probably kept their doors open this long because they were just fine selling me alcohol. I literally walked into one of the liquor stores on prom night wearing a tuxedo, with my prom date, wearing our prom dress, clearly looking like we were going to prom, and walked out with enough booze and for the weekend. And I was grateful. I'm grateful for that now, because I needed that. I needed to get drunk to survive. I needed to get me out of the way I was feeling. And throughout the course of my drinking, I did have issues come up. Right, I started having some consequences to my alcoholism. That I had problems with the police, and I had the problem. I had enough problems with the police that I had to join the army. And when I got into the army, I really fine-tuned my drinking. I spent 6 years in the military, and that's where I transitioned from drinking a ton of beer to drinking alcohol. When I was leaving the military, and I served from 90 to 96, I'm honorably discharged. And when I left in 96, right before coming home, I realized I was no better coming home than I was having gotten there. And my family had this expectation that, and I think most people do, of being in the military, and that there's a certain level of discipline that they instill in us to make us more receptive to that type of lifestyle. And by and large, that's true for a lot of people. But when you drink like I do, the rules don't apply. And so I left in 96. I realized that I was no better off than when I got there. And that was another mild spiritual awakening that I've gotten. that I didn't drink like other people, and it was causing me significant problems. When I got home, I tried to curtail my drinking, that controlled drinking that our literature talks about. Once I recognized that I didn't drink like normal people, I tried to put a limit on how much I would drink, and it didn't take that long. It didn't take that long for me to just give up on that. And I would drink like I wanted to. You know, they talk in and I did that for 4 years. For 4 more years, I went back and forth drinking, and little by little, the idea of not wanting to live anymore started to creep back in, and that ease and comfort that came with the first drink, after a while, it stopped working. And you know, I had that self-knowledge awareness in 1996 that I didn't drink like normal people, and then and that wasn't enough to stop drinking, and then drinking stopped. This slowly but surely, it stopped doing for me what it used to do, which was, you know, again, that ease and comfort that comes with the first drink. In October of '99, it's the first time I asked anybody for help. I was in the restaurant business. I was throwing drinks at a steakhouse here in Chicago, and I worked with about five guys that were in AA, and it seemed like they were active in AA. You know, at least they were going to meetings. I didn't care for four of them, and but there was one guy that I was working with. This guy was just on fire, and he was very likable, very approachable. And I asked him for help in October of '99, and he said yes. And then we were supposed to go to a meeting the following day. And if your alcoholism is like mine, you separate me from a drink long enough, and it doesn't have to be a few weeks or a few months. You know, within 24 hours, my head will rationalize that I wasn't that bad, that everything that I had experienced were just hiccups, right? It wasn't that big a deal. And that 24 hours of when he said yes and meet me at a meeting, I talked myself out of it. And then the next 6 months, I was just ridiculously out of control. I don't know if deep down inside me, I knew that this was coming to an end, whether I would stop or I would just drink myself to death. But I just hit it so crazy hard for the next 6 months. And then in March, at the end of March of 2000, I asked the same guy for help, and I was completely blown away, and really with my tail between my legs, and he said yes, and I was completely blown away. Like, you know what I mean? I was still of the mindset, like, if you screwed me over once, we were done, right? And here's a guy, I stood him up, you know, half a year earlier, and I came back to him. He said yes again, and this time I managed not to drink. From the time he said yes to the time I met him at the meeting, and this time he picked like a real early meeting the next day, and I showed up to that meeting with a couple of days sober, and because when I asked him for help, he was like, you know, can you make it a day this time? And I said I would try, and he took me to my first meeting. It was at the Fourth Presbyterian Church here in Chicago. It was a 3rd and 11th step. I raised my hand saying that I was at my first meeting of life, and they turned it into a first step. The Fourth Presbyterian Church is in a neighborhood that you typically don't find people like myself in, and I felt like all these people were just a little bit too swanky, you know, to be anything like me. And the lead, you know, cut right through me. The comments, you know, put me back together, and I left that meeting with a bunch of hugs and a bunch of phone numbers, and I haven't had to drink since then. And you know, this guy that I'm really grateful for, the guy that 12-stepped me. This guy, his name's Todd B. He lives in Atlanta, Georgia now, and I love him with my heart, all my heart. And you know, and the debt that I owe him, I pay it forward in Alcoholics Anonymous. He's never asked me for anything in return, but other than do my best in this program and carry the message. And that's, you know, in my head, I feel like I owe, you know, but I don't owe him. I owe all of you. And this guy was incredibly active in recovery, and started, you know, the first thing that we did after we left that meeting, we walked a couple of miles to our central office here in Chicago, and he made me buy my own big book. And I was pretty upset right off the bat. I'm like, why are you making me buy a big book? He offered me one for free at the meeting, and you want me to buy a new big book? And he's like, I work with you, and now that you're not drinking, I know how much money you make, and you can afford a big book. He goes, those big books are for people who are down and out, people who can't put together the $6, which is what the third edition cost back then. He goes, the $6. They can't afford the $6 to buy a big book. You can, and I'm gonna show you where your recovery is gonna start. And he walked me over to the office, and he showed me around. He showed me where I would be volunteering on my day off, and where I would meet him. And on Friday mornings, he used to answer phones, and I would meet him there at the office while he answered phones, and we would read through the book afterwards. And I wanted to answer phones right away, but my sponsor was really honest with me. He says, you don't know anything, so you can't help anybody. But what you can do is you can go in the back of this office here and stuff envelopes and cut paper and staple things, and you can do whatever they need you to do for the next 4 hours. This guy took me to my first international conference. He introduced me to what would become my home group that I've been going to for over 19 and a half years. He would introduce me to a network of people in recovery that has stayed with me the entire time I've been sober. Now, I don't drink anymore, and I haven't felt thirsty in a long time, but on the inside, I'm still broken. I'm still restless, irritable, and discontent. That ease and comfort only comes when I engulf myself in the program of recovery. Not going to meetings has never been my problem. I know for a lot of people with time, they take little breaks from going to meetings. That's never been my story. That's not to say that I've worked a perfect program. I haven't. There isn't, through working the steps and everything before I got sober and into my recovery, there isn't a jackpot that I've never gotten into that wasn't my fault. I played a part in my entire life, but not coming to meetings is never been an issue. Now, okay, so I'm restless, irritable, and discontent no matter what, and I come to these meetings and I do this work for that ease and comfort that helps relieve me from feeling that way. Now, if you take me to a wedding or you take me to a funeral, I feel the same way inside. I am uncomfortable. Now, I may look incredibly thrilled and happy to be at a wedding, and I could look incredibly sad and empathetic to be at this funeral, but at the inside, I feel the same way. I am uncomfortable. And being grounded in this program of recovery helps me with that. While in recovery, I've been able to do a lot of, incredible things. The guy who 12-stepped me and took me to my first meeting and my first sponsor, he moved back to Georgia when I was about 5 or 6 months sober. And he introduced me to a gentleman that would sponsor me for a number of years and take me to his home group. And that's been my home group for a long time. The guy who 12-stepped me took me to a WIPA host bid committee meeting at the central office and introduced me to a bunch of people. And a bunch of those people have been a part of my life for the last 19, 20 years. He introduced me to service work, and I've been able to do a good amount of service work from the group level all the way down to triangle to having served at the General Service Conference as a delegate. I've in this program of recovery, I've become employable. I was able to get out of the bar business, and I was, and I got that 6-figure job wearing a suit and tie every day. I also got fired from that suit and tie job. In recovery, one of the people that this guy introduced me to, I ended up started dating her about 1.5 years into my recovery, and then a couple years after that, we got married. And she came along with when we started dating. She had a 6-year-old son, and that kid now is 24 years old, and he still calls me dad. And with this woman, I was able to have a daughter, and she's 12 now, and neither one of these kids have ever seen me. They've never seen me pick up a drink. In the program of recovery, I've been overweight, I've been underweight, I've been able to, I've run 6 marathons and 2 ultras, and I've quit smoking, and I started smoking, and quit smoking and started smoking. And all the while, life has been going on. In 20 years of recovery, and I've not had to pick up a drink through anything. This program works. I've had the best day of my life. I've had a few best days of my life, and I've had the worst day of my life. About 4.5 years ago, my wife had come from a business trip from Florida, and she used to work for Alcoholics Anonymous here in Chicago. And she came home after a conference in Fort Lauderdale and had been asked to basically offered a job at the general service office by their new general manager. And she had turned it down in Florida right off the bat because she had gone back to school. There isn't anything that I hadn't done that was super great in AA that my wife wasn't with me, basically. And my wife had gone back to school to get her CPA, and she was off of work on this particular Monday, having come back from this trip. It was the day after her 7th. My wife's got more time than me, and it was the day right after her anniversary. And she decided to take a divvy bike to school, and on the way to school, she got sideswiped by a car and suffered a traumatic brain injury. And she went to when the hospital was able to get a hold of me. She was already on her way. She had already been admitted to the hospital and was getting ready for brain surgery. I had at the time an 18-year-old son coming home from work, and I had a 7-year-old daughter getting ready to get dropped off by the school bus. And I was able to arrange him picking her up and this, that, and the other. And I remember I started calling people from the program. And I was about 15 years sober at the time. And I was telling a buddy of mine something I hadn't said in a really long time, that I was afraid and I didn't know what to do. And he met me at the hospital. When the time I got to the hospital, my wife was already in surgery, and she had suffered a traumatic brain injury. And while we were in the waiting room, her family started to arrive. My family was spread out all over the place. And but then I had my sponsor, his wife, who was also in the program. I had three guys from my home group there with me when the surgeon came out of the surgery, and my brother-in-law asked her what were her chances, and he'd only given her 2 days to live. And I was having a bad day. And I'll skip ahead a little bit. My wife is sober. She's a fighter. Active in this program of recovery, and was in good health, and she didn't pass away. She was in a coma for nearly 2 years, and she's home with me now. And I share this story because I want to be clear about something. I already told you, I feel the same way at a wedding as I do a funeral. The outside parts may look different. I can easily drink over winning the lottery, and I can easily drink over a catastrophe, but because of this program of recovery, I don't have to. And let me tell you, I was a hot mess when the surgeon tells you that your wife's going to die in 2 days, and you basically got a baby at the house, and that was the 18-year-old. The 7-year-old was way braver and smarter. I was a hot mess. I was a hot mess. Trust me, I should have waited about 6 hours before I called my mom, right? And but the people in Alcoholics Anonymous, right from the beginning, when I couldn't stand up, they held me up. That's what we do here, right? We hold each other up. We work through this program as best we can. It's my job to meet you people where you're at. I don't have to set the bar so high that you people can't attain it, right? No one's ever done that for me. And on that specific day, I was a hot mess. My sponsor, sometime after that, he said I handled the whole ordeal with grace and dignity. And I was like, really? You really lowered the bar on that. And but this program works. I was at my home group 4 days later. I was at my regular Sunday meeting, the 2 days after that. The following week, I started going back to the 3-4 meetings that I normally go to. And I didn't look comfortable, and I didn't look thrilled or happy. I was going, we spent 8 weeks waiting for my wife to die. A lot of times people have an accident, and they have the accident and they get better. And we sat there waiting for her to pass away until obviously she didn't. And all the while I stayed in this program of recovery. And there was somebody before the meeting talking about you know, they were having a really bad day and that they were at their second meeting today. Absolutely. This is a great thing to do. It's the right thing to do. I don't know how long that person's been in recovery, but you know, my little shtick around here in Chicago is that less AA is never the solution. You know, throw more of this program of recovery into anything that we've got going on into our lives. You know, when I got that six-figure suit and tie job, you know, I had to go to more meetings because otherwise I would celebrate my ass out of there. You know, when I had my baby, I had to do more meetings. You know, when I had this incident happen with my wife, I had to continue doing more Alcoholics Anonymous. And I know there's a thing where, you know, it used to, when I first got sober, we used to say meeting makers make it. And then that got unpopular, right? Because it you know, one assumed like if all you were doing was meetings, you weren't doing anything else. You know, it's been my experience that for those of us that go to a lot of meetings, we're probably doing everything else that we're supposed to be doing too. And a few of us that tend to kind of slack off one way or another, I'd rather have you at a meeting not doing anything else than not be at a meeting. Because those folks that I've seen that come to AA and stop going to meetings, 9 times out of 10, the end result's exactly the same. You know what I mean? It's like 9 times out of 10, they get drunk. You know what I mean? It's like coming to these meetings and you know, and then of course, working with a sponsor, working with sponsees, which is more important than working with a sponsor. You know, doing the 12 steps, doing the service work, really making this a part of your life. And you know, I promise you that if you throw yourself right in the middle of this program, you can have the best day of your life and not drink. You can have the worst day of your life and not drink. I did not set out, nor did my wife set out to be the poster children in Alcoholics Anonymous of having the worst day of your life and not drinking. But that's now part of our story. And it was, and I'm grateful to be here. You know, I was at a meeting the other day and they were the daily reflections was about being happy, joyous, and free. And, you know, I wished that there was like, there's a list somewhere in any one of our books that says like, well, if these things happen to you, you get to manufacture your own misery. That list does not exist. You know, regardless of what's going on in our lives, you know, we've come out on the other end of drinking and we're here in recovery and we deserve to be happy, joyous, and free at a minimum. I certainly did not do anything to warrant being miserable unless I manufacture that myself. I want to thank, and you know what, Kristen's a superhero. You know, that girl, you know, she's had some, you know, some things happen in her life, right? In recovery that you would think that you would be, you wouldn't have to deal with because you're sober now and you work in this program. But she stayed sober. I've stayed sober. If you're sitting in this meeting and you're struggling because of the pandemic or because of life or because of work or because of spouse or because of this, that, or the other, I promise you, if you throw yourself into this program, you can stay sober and then get on the other side of that and you can find that happy, joyousness, and free. And with all that, I'll keep coming back. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruben. Thanks so much.